Good evening, dear. How are you?
Good
Good
evening. I
evening.
am doing well. How about yourself?
Good. Happy Good Friday, which
You too.
seems anathema to me. I
Yes.
don't understand why people wish anybody happy Good Friday. And I mean, I understand the religiosity of it, because, of course, the sacrifice. But we'll delve into that some tonight. I just want everybody to know that I am proud to announce that not only am I with my partner, Jeff Turner, for Soul School tonight, but there's more to talk about. And so we're going to take a 5-minute break between shows. Bill's going to run whatever he does. I've never seen it, so I don't know, but something. And then we will come back on our next link and do a world awakening together. There's a lot to discuss. Um, Classes in session. Everybody is welcome. I would suggest that tonight everyone sit in the front of the class, take notes, because this has been a whirlwind week and a lot has happened, and we are dealing with full moon, Libra, pink moon energy, and the alignment of all of the stars in the sky simultaneously, all of our planets lining up. It's what was it? The great convergence that was supposed to happen like 20 years ago or so, and how it was supposed to be the shift and change everything. And um, you know, everything's changing all of the time. We've talked about this so much, Jeff. And I think that some of which bears repeating. And I want to go further. And because it is Easter weekend, I want to focus on this show and on later with you in our second hour on a world awakening. I want to do a little bit of some Peter Cottontail hopping down the bunny trail and down the rabbit hole. So everybody that's watching Soul School, you can take a break, make a coffee, and then come right back, because a world awakening is going to be intense tonight. As for Soul School, I don't know what you've learned this past week, Jeff, but it has been, I've traveled for the first time in this new year. I went to Ohio, and then I was in Detroit and Ann Arbor, Michigan. I was gone with my travel time 5 days, which was extremely stressful in terms of being away from my mother and so busy that I couldn't really talk with my sister Christine. Good night, honey. Very much at all during the course of my trip. So it was really hard, staying on top of mom's condition, what's going on, who's there to help, all of that. Thankfully, Christine is a very, very capable woman. My sister Cindy lives just down the street. We have nieces and nephews all around us, and she had help. But everybody who watches the show, I'm sure, knows that my mom's having a difficult time. She's struggling with her health, and that it has had a dramatic impact on her, of course, but our entire family. Because everybody's pitching in either moral support or physical support, or the hospice nurse comes. We have a whole infrastructure of people who are helping us through this tumultuous time. And I was very fortunate. I believe my friend Erin, who assists me. And Lenny and Jeff, of course. I was with them all weekend this past weekend, up in Ohio, and then in Michigan. And I want your opinion about this, because I'm sure I'm not the only person on earth who has ever felt this way. Steeped in, for instance, Candace, is probably watching. And Candace and I are in very close touch, and she's been going through, very similar scenario. And her mom's doing much better. I'm so, so glad. Um, but we are now at an age where we're starting to lose our parents. And some of us already have. And so it's, to be able to commiserate with each other. The reason that Linny and I know each other is because she lost her mom, and her search for some meaning around all of this. And she's, very religious, and she's very
Mhm.
affiliated with the same church that her mom was a member of. And so she's got that support system, but she was looking beyond. And she saw me interviewed on a a show years and years ago. It's got to be like 8 years now. And she reached out to me on Facebook back when I was in a position to be able to answer Facebook messages, which I no
Right.
longer am really able to do. Um, and she reached out to me, and we connected, and we became fast friends. And then I met her wonderful husband, and we became fast friends, and we are thick as thieves. And I mean, they pick me up at the airport, and they take me here and they take me there. And so I had that wonderful, loving energy around me this past weekend.
Mm.
And was with wonderful people. Got to see John and Jessica, got to see, well, Heather and Chad, who I had on the show a few weeks ago. It was their event. It was flawless. It was spectacular. I enjoyed myself enormously. Here's the kicker. I felt guilty.
Mm.
I felt guilty. And I was like, oh my God, my old Catholicism is kicking in.
Mm.
I feel guilty for being happy
Mm.
and feeling carefree, and everything around me was working flawlessly. Lynn and Jeff ran the table. I was able to mingle with people that had come and really spend some good quality time with the guests at this event. Um, and I felt guilty about it.
Mm.
I felt like, oh, oh, she's so sweet, Candace. Oh my God, I love you. I love you, sweetheart. Um, I really did. I felt like I will never refer to my mother as a burden,
Mm.
ever. She's not. She never would be, under any circumstances. Thank you, sweetheart. Um, but I felt like a weight lifted off. Like I had a few days that I could focus my energy and my attention and step back into my paranormal community of people.
Mhm.
Um, and that it would be so, well, you know how it is. When we do events together, Jeff, UFO contact, it's a freaking love fest. I
Mhm.
mean, you're just infused with all of this. Hello, Lori. Um, you just absolutely infused
Yeah.
with this amazing energy and love and support and comfort. No matter how tired, no matter how exhausting the trip was, no matter how many hours, I know, baby, um, you put into a single day,
Yeah.
no matter if you're, like only awake from the neck up and dragging the whole rest of the vessel along with you.
Mm.
Hi, Jonathan. Oh, that's my Jonathan Altieri up in Rhode
Mm.
Island. I love him so much. Um, And so we were on our way to this fabulous event for our Sunday event with invited, very cordially invited by Heather and Chad, at the Whitney, which is a magnificent edifice. It's an extraordinary building in downtown Detroit, of all places.
Mm.
It's a very fancy restaurant. It's absolutely magnificent building, stuff that you would see maybe in Newport, the summer cottages of the uber rich.
Mm.
And yet there's a spirituality about the place. There's a loveliness about it that just makes you feel calm. And Everybody there, treated us like we were freaking royalty. I mean, it was lovely. And on the way back, we were talking about the weekend and how the weekend had gone, and how inspiring it was, and all of that. And I looked at Lenny. We were in the back seat together, and I just looked at her and I said, I feel guilty for being this happy. And she knew exactly what I was talking about. And I was wondering, Jeff, if you ever had that kind of feeling, that you shouldn't be enjoying yourself and things appear so bleak otherwise,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I want to say, first off, I hope you know that my heart, my prayers, my love, my good thoughts, everything I have been aimed at you and your family for the last several weeks, and this week in particular, because I knew it was a rough time, and I'm sure that's the truth as it concerns the entire audience. So we love you and we're with you 100%.
Thank
Our
you.
hearts are. But yeah, no, I've been there. And, the truth is, the last few months, I've had a little bit of a tumultuous last couple of months, few months, let's say. And, I've had several moments like that myself, where it's like, boy, I really just feel like I need to blow off some steam. I really just feel like I need to go see a movie, go whatever, just something fun. You know what I mean? And then you get that old feeling of there's too much going on right now. This isn't how you should be feeling. You should be more focused and intense and focusing on the problems at hand and the issues at hand and focusing on how to better yourself and how to navigate through them or whatever. And it's funny how our old gods find new ways to speak, isn't it? The religiosity of our past that we thought we buried and was gone, it finds new ways of speaking in our lives. And I've definitely been there. Truth be told, I once lived in a manner where I felt guilty. I mean, and I'm talking maybe just 15 years ago, I felt guilty just being alive. I mean, just, going out to a restaurant with my wife, going and doing something fun with my kids, I'd be in the midst of enjoying it. I'd be in the midst of having like the time of my life, because for a moment I forgot about the larger problems that were at hand and the larger problems I imagined at hand in that former way of viewing the world. And then all of a sudden I would catch myself and be like, oh my God, the stakes are so high. People are going to hell, this, that, and the other. As a former fundamentalist Christian, that's how I thought. How can I just be sitting here in a restaurant enjoying myself when all of this is going on around me? And I found it terribly difficult to just enjoy life. And it took me a long time to get to a point where I weaned myself off of that system's sour milk, and learned to be able to enjoy life. And I often tell people, beware of any system of faith or ideology that teaches you to feel good about feeling bad and bad about feeling good. Yeah. And that's how you know if something is from, quote, God or not. But, something that's brought me great comfort over the years is in the book of Ecclesiastes, which is kind of seems to sound like a depressing book, but it's actually quite a philosophically profound book in the Bible, where Kohelet, or the teacher in Ecclesiastes, he weaves this tapestry of life. Is he talks about all of the things he's pursued meaning in. He's pursued meaning in wealth and riches, and of course the teacher here is portrayed as being Solomon. Now it's more than likely not Solomon, but that's who it's portrayed as being. So Solomon, this rich king of Israel, wisest man who ever lived. And so that's the perspective it's coming from. And so it's like, I pursued meaning in wealth and wisdom and relationships and this, that, and the other. And I came to the end and realized that it's all meaningless. That's how it's translated in English. But the word meaningless actually translates as in flux, that it's always changing. And so he's basically saying that all of life is cyclical, that everything's always moving, that nothing is really stable in the way that we think of stability. It's always moving. And so he's like, so I was like, well, what do I do then? And he said, the one thing I found was that whatever my hand found to do it with all of my might. And then he goes on, there's the famous line, to everything there's a season, a time to be born, a time to die, a time for this, a time for that. I believe the Byrds also wrote a song about that, right? And
yeah, they stole the lyrics. Yeah.
That's how most people know it. But that whole there's a season for this, that, and the other he goes through. The point of that's the answer to the problem he puts forth in the beginning, which is that I was looking for meaning, and for me, meaning meant stability. But instead, what I found is that everything's constantly moving. Everything, we're always in a season where things are changing. Nothing just remains the same forever. And so I thought to myself, well, it's all meaningless then because it's always changing. And then I came to the conclusion, no, I need to be fully present in whatever season I'm in, because there's a time and a season for everything. And so whatever I find to do in that season, do it with all of my might. And when I do that, I'm doing the right thing. And so there's a time to mourn and there's a time to laugh. And it's not like that time, there's like, it actually has to last months. I mean, you could be in a time to mourn 5 minutes ago, and then 5 minutes later, you're in a time to laugh, And that's the secret, is just knowing what season you're in and being fully present in it. And so if you're watching a funny movie, it doesn't matter if you had a rather heavy conversation an hour ago. If now you're in the company of other people and you're watching a funny movie and something is genuinely funny to you, it's okay to laugh because you're in laughing season at that point. You know what I mean? And it's okay. And as human beings, we need to give ourselves permission to just be in the season we're in, to enjoy it, to be as fully present there as we can be. And I mean, I think that's really the secret to a happy existence, because life can be miserable sometimes. There's a lot of suffering. I mean, the one steady thing that all philosophers have agreed upon as far as life is concerned is that it's suffering. That's the one thing no one can deny about life, is that suffering is always present, and everybody feels love too, but people could argue about what that even is. But one thing nobody can deny is that suffering is real. And so when we're suffering and we find those moments of relief and respite, we got to let ourselves have them. We got to let ourselves be present there. And there's nothing to feel guilty about. It's a gift. It's a refreshing breeze that was sent your way by the universe, by God, for your refreshment. And really, the worst thing you could do is not take it, because it's a gift,
Yeah. Well, I had a gift walk in this door yesterday. After some difficult days since my arrival back home. Erin came up, and most everybody that knows me knows that Erin's a Reiki energy healer, and I think she keeps me on my feet. Actually, she's better than my chiropractor. And it was so strange because I'm sitting on the sofa that my mother suddenly decided that she wanted to lay on. My mother never lays on the sofa. Right there is her recliner, and that's her chair. And suddenly, about an hour before Erin arrived, and I don't know how she did. She drove 7 hours and then walked in to this house as fresh as spring rain. And here's Mom right where I am right now. Hi, Peanut. There's my baby. Oh, she wants me to rub her belly because, belly. Okay, I can do that, honey. I can walk and chew gum at the same time. That's my baby. This is my baby right here. Erin walked in and she took Mom's hand and she got down on her knees next to the sofa and she gave Mom a Reiki treatment. And Mom was kind of out of it. She was medicated and she was very sedate, but she was thrilled to see Erin. And she just kind of closed her eyes and drifted off, to my understanding, and let Erin do what she did. And then she did another hands-on with her later. And it was almost like it drained all of the energy out of her. Yeah. But I think what it did was it drained toxin out of her. Because we had to go put her in bed. Erin didn't stay long. She was on her way to see her folks for Easter weekend up here in north of Atlanta. And so she had to go. And we put Mom in bed. And about an hour and a half after we put Mom in bed, here she is all connected to her oxygen tube, this long tube. I'm in the kitchen getting dog's dinner ready at the sink. And I hear from behind me, "I'm up. I would like to go watch the news, please." And she's hooked to her oxygen machine, which it's huge. It's not a portable one. And so we had to, go grab her right away and get her in the wheelchair and get her out into the parlor and get her all set up. And she had a wonderful evening,
Mm.
and she had a wonderful day today, a really good day. And it was beautiful outside. And I got to take her out on the porch and out on the back deck so that she could see the roses on her rose bush blooming, and
Mm.
everything here in Georgia is in bloom, everything. And interestingly, I was talking to her before she had to go, and talking about how, she lives down in St. Augustine, Florida. So, of course, everything bloomed out weeks down there before it even did here. But we were talking, how strange it was that I was just in a place where everything is barren still. It's
Hmm.
just too early for
Hmm.
Michigan to be in full bloom.
Yeah.
It's too early. And it's too early for Ohio to be in full bloom. We had a massive storm go through the day of the event, knocked out our electricity for about 4 hours. Of course, we kept right on going with the event. There was enough light to see, and it was, it was great. It was kind of spooky. It was great.
Mm.
Um, and I thought it was interesting, the juxtaposition of where I was up north in the frozen tundra,
Yeah.
and then coming back in. And then the 5 days that I was gone, all the trees that had just little buds on them when I left were in full bloom.
Mm.
Everything was in full bloom. It was like flying back down into full blown spring.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's interesting, and it helps me process this whole whirlwind trip, um, by thinking in terms, you've given me a new way to think about this. The moments, each moment is, might be its own season.
Hmm.
And, look how it was up there, and yet full of life, full
Yeah.
of wonder. The landscape was barren, but the place itself and the people were just wondrous.
Yeah.
It was an extraordinary. I needed it, Jeff. I needed it like air to breathe. I didn't even know how
Yeah.
much I needed it.
Yeah.
Yes, Melissa, I absolutely agrees.
Mm.
Yep, I absolutely agree with her.
Mm.
It's the peanut right here. Um, and I think it's interesting that old stuff, and we talked about this just recently, old stuff keeps coming up. And I used to just shun it, dismiss it, create the vacancy, and then fill it with something positive.
Hmm.
Um, and I've taken a little bit different stance on that now. I'm looking to see what's coming up and why.
Yeah.
Why? Um, and I was talking with John Tenney about that too, about uh, the strange changes that are occurring, how we're interpreting what's going on in the world, how we're coping with
Hmm.
what's going on in the world, and coping with our own processing of it. Um, and it's amazing how diverse and eclectic the paranormal community is in terms of opinions and persuasions, and how they interpret evidence, and all of that stuff on in a microcosmic way. But in a macrocosmic way, I noticed a whole lot of similarities, and we seem to struggle with a lot of the same things, especially people that have had experiences. When I do a lecture, I often ask, how many people in this room have been touched by spirit? Know that
Mm.
they have been touched by spirit in some way, shape, or form. And most of the hands go up, not usually every single one. Some
Hmm.
people are just curious and want to know more and will gravitate to events like this. But I think that it's incumbent upon us
Hmm.
not to just tell, spooky stories that you would hear around a campfire,
Hmm.
but to delve more deeply into why. what is all of this about in a macrocosmic way. And because it is Holy Week, because today is quote unquote Good Friday, again, good for whom? Because it wasn't a good day for Jesus. I mean, to be crippled and tortured and to die slowly in the most gruesome way imaginable is not my idea of a good time.
Yeah.
And yet, when I think of the simplicity of his message, love one another,
Yeah.
love one another, just love one another. That's the common denominator that we all seem to share. And yeah, we're all in this together. Yeah, we're all fascinated by the same thing. Yes, we all want to believe that there is life after death, that there is an afterlife, that we will be with our loved ones again, so on and so forth. And there are people that work in this field who strive daily to be the ones that prove. They want that definitive proof, that scientific evidence. And I just experience it. And I don't need anything proven to me. I've lived it practically my whole life. I've lived it. It's perfectly normal to me. It's not normal. It's just normal. It's part of life and death. But I'm sure that perspective comes from spending a decade of my life, dwelling among the dead and having them attempt in whatever way they could, whatever energy they could generate to communicate with us. And I think that that's extraordinary that would happen. So to be in an environment where you can talk like this and everybody gets it, everybody does, they get it, is very liberating. And so if you're in a situation in life where you feel downtrodden or depressed or sad, I would say gravitate to like-minded individuals that understand you, that you can have open, honest conversations with about, for lack of a better word, some weird subject matter, and use that as an opportunity maybe to create a season, not to wait for it to happen to you, but to create that season of joy and wonder and camaraderie and friendship and love, because that was, after all, Jesus's message. And for someone who lived more than 2,000 years ago, he left a dramatic imprint on the planet.
Yes.
But then again, here we're in Soul School here tonight and looking at this from every angle, every perspective. And last week comes a report from the Diocese of Baltimore about unbelievable abuse of children in the Catholic Church. And it's not unbelievable. We've heard this story over and over and over again. And we all thought that all had been revealed. All had already been revealed about it's not just sexual abuse. Of course, that is the most heinous, but the psychological damage, the permanent damage. A lot of these victims, based on this extensive report, a lot of the perpetrators were already dead, and a lot of the victims were already dead, had already lived their lives carrying the burdens of that kind of, to be harmed in such a way by someone who you consider an authority figure and someone that you trust. When I heard that report, the first thing I thought of was you. Because we talked about the darkness and the light existing simultaneously. So I wanted to get some of your back on that. I know you stay up to date on all of these things, and I want to know what your. That's okay. You can sneeze. Do you need to sneeze?
I got a bit of a congestion thing, so my throat's scratchy. Sorry.
You got a thing. Bill's got a thing. I'm getting over it. Yeah, we're all a thing. It's a thing.
It is a thing.
It is.
Yeah.
I wanted to know, like, I was living in Rhode Island when the whole Father Porter thing came out in Massachusetts, and he went to trial and then he went to jail, and that was really opening up. We didn't know it at the time, but that was opening up Pandora's box. And and here we are all these years later thinking, well, it's all out now. That box has been emptied. Cardinal Law from Boston, who should have gone to jail, instead was given a very nice cushy apartment in the Vatican where he lived until his death. No consequences, no accountability, no nothing. And he was moving these priests around to one diocese after another, basically knowing what they had been doing, and because of complaints and issues that they were having, they just sent them someplace else. Never forewarned anybody that there was a sexual predator on the way to their church, and basically provided them with fresh meat. I know that sounds harsh, but that's the truth of it. Let's just tell the truth of it.
Right.
So here we go again with the intermingling of the darkness and the light, which we will carry forth into our next hour on A World Awakening. But what I guess the question that I have for you that I would like for you to expound on is, why isn't Jesus's message as relevant as it once was? Why is the simplicity and the purity of the love one another, do unto others as though you are the others? The messages that he put forth in life that have endured, that people built religions around. How did it go so wrong when the message was so right? How did that happen? How did, and we'll again in the next hour, how did that wall, that perceived wall, that separation of church and state, how did all of this intermingle and become so corrupted and so ugly and authoritarian and more about power than the message itself? And how do we get back to the purity of the message that Jesus Christ brought to the world that imprinted billions of people? How do we get back to that? I will answer from my perspective before you run with this. I think that somewhere along the line, humanity maybe didn't lose, but misplaced our natural empathy for each other, our ability to put ourselves in the shoes of another person, even if just for a few moments before we judge anything. And I think that what we have to do is strive to rekindle that emotion that I do believe that we're born with. None of us like to see someone else suffer. No, and it was the suffering. It was Jesus Christ's suffering that left such a scar on the heart of humanity. And yet it was in his resurrection that we were supposed to be liberated, because he supposedly paid for our sins. Now, I can't say that I buy into all of that. You know how I feel about that. I think Jesus was an extraterrestrial sent from the race that we worship as God. I think that that's entirely plausible. It makes more sense to me than virtually any other explanation of this. That said, how do we get back to the pure, heartfelt message of a simple man who walked the earth and spread love?
Yeah.
An easy question for you, Jeff.
Yeah.
Just go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot to say, a lot to be said on that. I think as human beings, we evolved. We evolved to survive. That's pretty simple. And those of us who are here are the ancestors of those who survived. And so those who survived, yes, there were communal aspects to survival, in a tribal culture where you learn to engage with your fellow tribes people. But there was also a very definite survival need in that era to create a distinction between us and others, just as a survival mechanism. In order to make it, tribes had to say, we're safe here, but we're not safe over there. And those people are different from us. So, and as a result of doing that, pockets of people survived and reproduced and continued to reproduce. And we are the heirs, unfortunately, of that cognition that no longer serves us the way that maybe it once served us right after we left the trees, right? And so now we have this brain that splits the world into two and sees in binaries, right? And the message of someone like Jesus is that the things that you see as being distinct or as separate from one another, the darkness and the light, the other and yourself, the chosen race of Israel, let's say, in his Jewish context, and the outsider Gentiles who are to be judged, as it was supposed at the time. If you think of it in modern Christian terms, the righteous saved versus the, those out here, or the righteous versus the infidel, whatever, this distinction between us and the other, that's a very base primal instinct that is a vestige of a much earlier time that doesn't serve us anymore, but it's still functioning in us, right? And so Jesus comes and says, in his person, in the story at least, whatever one believes of it, in his person at least, it's the union of the divine and the human. So him in himself is the message that the things you don't think fit are actually one in me, the hypostatic union, fully divine, fully human. So his very being is the message that what we think opposite is actually one. And then he comes, everything that Jesus does. I have a message anytime it's my first time speaking at a church. It's the one message I always give. And I've been speaking this message for like 10 years now, called "So You Think You're Offended." And it's basically,
I'll show you how offended you can be. Yeah.
And I basically just go through, all I do is go through in the book of Luke and trace how Jesus absolutely offended and upended the religious sensibilities of his contemporaries, and that's what led to his crucifixion. Everything he is doing in this one long stretch of scriptures, that's all he's doing. He starts by going into the temple, and the book of Isaiah is given to him, and he reads from Isaiah 61 that says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he's anointed me to preach good news to the poor, to proclaim freedom to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And then the next verse says, "And the day of God's vengeance." Now, there's a fragment, 11Q13 from the Qumran scrolls, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Sorry, little brain malfunction there. So fragment 11Q13 is called the Melchizedek scroll, and in this we get a little peek, a little insight into some Jewish thinking. Some tribes and some sects rather view on that passage was that they said when Messiah shows up, he will publicly declare this passage, but the big part that's he's going to emphasize is this part about the day of God's vengeance. However, when the scroll is handed to Jesus in the synagogue in his hometown, he stops at the year of the Lord's favor and does not say in the day of God's vengeance. He cuts the part out that they were most anticipating, because there was apocalyptic, fever was spreading like COVID back then, and the idea was that we, the righteous Israelites, right, we will be saved, and the Gentiles who have trespassed on this holy land, they're going to be driven out. And that was the idea. And Jesus shows up and he says, hey, I'm the guy, only I'm here to preach the exact opposite message that you were expecting. It's not the year of it's not the year of God's favor for you and the day of God's vengeance for them. It's the year of God's favor, period, for everyone. And then he goes on in that same message to upset the apple cart even more. And I won't go into all that. And it ends with them trying to push him off of a cliff and murder him. You know, that's quite a way to finish up your first sermon, right? And I've had some not so warm welcomes, but never one quite so unwarm. And from there on out, he just goes on to just one thing after the other, after the other, after the other, to seemingly violate the Mosaic law, something that would invalidate him as Messiah. And it was all about him showing, every time he does it, it's about, okay, is it okay for me to basically allow this person to suffer in the name of keeping the law? Or should I break the law and ease this person's suffering? And then he sits back and sees what they do. And the religious leaders are always like, well, you can't break the law, so it's better to let the person suffer and to have kept the law than to ease suffering and have broken the law. And he just does this over and over and over again through this passage. And that's like really the bulk of what Jesus does. Just this constant offending of the religious spirit by showing that at the end of the day, it is more important to be included and put an extra seat at the table for the other than it is to exclude in the name of religion and whatever. So Jesus was trying to bring these opposing forces together in our minds, that in our minds we thought we have to separate from the other to survive. Jesus is saying, no, to actually survive and thrive, we have to bring them together, right? And so that's why they crucify him, because he's preaching inclusivity of not just, you know, their fellow Jews who maybe weren't as religious as the other Jews, but inclusion of the very people who they feared were going to come in and destroy them, the Romans, the very ones they thought were making their land unclean. Jesus is saying, no, you've even got to see them as a brother. You know, you've even got to see them as a sister. And I mean, that's still a difficult message to see your political opponents as
it is. And we're still seeing to this day, 2,000 plus years later, that money and power are the rule of law. And that the only way that money and power can remain as linked as they are is through the propagation of fear. And so in his day, what they feared was not just him, the individual, but the message, because he was wiping that fear away. Love your brother as yourself. Love your sister as thyself. And tearing down all the borders and all the boundaries. And the message, everything is one thing, really came into wide existence at that time. Because, and he wasn't the only one preaching it, but he was certainly the preeminent one who had the most notoriety, and, you know, a few years before Facebook existed. I mean, it stuck. It was a message that stuck with humanity. But I really do feel like a very important part of the message of Jesus Christ, of Christ consciousness, has to do with our ability to empathize.
Absolutely.
Not just sympathize with others. Oh, that's so terrible. That poor thing, what happened to them? I feel such sympathy. No, to actually take yourself and put yourself in that person's position. In your mind. Thoughts are things, long enough to feel their pain. To understand what they are enduring. And only then, I think, are we really capable of helping one another heal. Once we have felt that twinge, that pang of pain that they're feeling. You know, so empaths, I mean, you know, we know a lot of empaths, you know, from working in this field, who are just miserable because they're picking up, but they're happy being miserable because they feel like they're doing something and they're helping to heal the world. But they pick up on other people's pain and grief, particularly so with such ease.
Yeah.
Excuse me. If they don't know how to let it go, if they don't know how to shed that, I think that's the step that we need to take with the people who are already there, to help
Yeah.
them learn to shed it, um, so that they can actually not harm themselves by helping to heal another.
Yeah.
So that it is a mutual healing that goes on.
Mhm.
I think that's something that we need to explore more, and we will in coming weeks in this little thing we call
Yeah.
Soul School. But I also
Yeah.
think that the most
Mm.
important thing that we need to do is um, renew those feelings that have been placed aside. Are you making notes? Are you making notes about what you want to say next? You're such a scholar.
I'm always making notes.
I
It's
know.
okay.
I know. Me too.
I'm
I know.
always listening.
I've had
I'm
my
always
big-
listening. Yeah. If my eyes drift down, I'm totally listening, but I'm always making notes.
I hear you. I do the
Yeah.
same thing with you all the
Mhm.
time. And maybe that's our path. Maybe
Mhm.
that's part of the universal lesson that we need to learn in order to spiritually ascend, to
Yeah.
get to a place. Because look around the world, and I see, and I feel such grief about it, because with sadness, I feel like Jesus and Jesus's message has been kicked to the curb
Mhm.
by a lot of people who profess to be his greatest followers.
Yeah.
And it is deeply, deeply disturbing to me. I think
Yeah.
we need to get back to square one, that maybe
Mhm.
we actually need to bounce way back, to
Yeah.
bounce way forward and make a
Mhm.
quantum leap into a higher level of consciousness, into Christ consciousness, into understanding the the true profundity of the message. Because how many times in the course of human history have we murdered the messenger to
Mhm.
silence the message?
Yeah.
And we're seeing that right now play out in our own country, right now,
Mhm.
in the state of Tennessee. Silence them, make them go away. We don't want to hear what they have to say. Go.
Mhm.
You are expelled because we say so.
Mhm.
So it's not really that different than what happened in the temple, where all the money lenders were in the temple, and Jesus
Mhm.
got so pissed off that he starts flipping tables, and basically says, get out, get out, get out. You've got the
Yeah.
wrong message. And now we're looking at a situation where those that want to be a voice for change in terms of, let's say, protecting our own children when they go off to school in the morning,
Mhm.
that is, I mean, we're seeing it's all inside out and upside down. And what do we have to do? We have 5 minutes. Go for it.
Yeah. Whew. Okay. 5 minutes.
We got a whole nother hour.
I know we
Anybody
do. I know we
paying
do.
attention, and just leap into the next show.
I well, and I think one thing we lose too is that any message. Okay, I always say this: the only way forward is to move in circles, right? And we think the only
Mhm.
way forward is to move in a linear path forward. But if that's all you're doing, you're not really going anywhere. We live in a world that's circular. We live in a world that's cyclical. So the way you move forward is by moving in circles. But every time, see, we think ending up back where we started is like having gone backwards. But no, 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 no. Ending back up where you started is just the point at which you can move forward again. And every time you make that circle, you're changed and everything else has changed. And so it's just constantly charging and becoming more and more and more and more. And that's Deleuze talks about novelty and how everything new appears in the form of a repetition. And it might not be the actual same thing repeating itself, but it is in spirit, but it's always becoming more and more and more and more, but it's still kind of the same. So like, okay, so the message of Jesus, any message worth preaching has to be able to evolve to the time that we're in, right? And I think it was it was Paul Tillich who said that his definition of the demonic is to cling onto a form a message as it was relevant in the past, but refusing to move forward and make that message relevant in the present. That was his definition of what, the demonic is. And so that's just the thing. There are people who are preaching the message of Jesus today who don't look like they're preaching the message of Jesus, right? Because they're not standing there and literally maybe proclaiming the gospel. Maybe they're advocating for laws and certain things like that. Maybe they're in politics and whatever, but they're still that voice. It's the same voice. It's the same thing. It's a repetition, but it just looks new because that's how it looks. Every time it comes full circle, it looks different, but it's the same thing. And so we're trying to use the old, how can I say this, Andrea? We got 5 minutes. Let me just say this. Here's the message. The message is, okay. The message is love. That's the message. The message is love. The message is inclusivity. The message is protecting life. The message is protecting, your brothers and your sisters. That's the message. It's love. That'll get you killed. But that's the message.
A lot of places on the planet. Yes.
It will. And anytime you're hearing that message, and I don't care if it's coming from a Christian, I don't care if it's coming from an atheist, I don't care if it's coming from a Buddhist, I don't care if it's coming from a Muslim, I don't care who it's coming from, a politician, if the message is love one another, no matter what form it takes, that is the gospel message. That is the message of Jesus. And we fail to recognize that. I mean, I'm still a Christian in a sense. I'm not as I was, but I still consider myself that. And one of the greatest failures of Christianity is to recognize the message of Jesus as it appears when it doesn't look like Jesus, and we don't recognize that.
Yeah, it was corrupted almost instantly, after his death and his resurrection, and we'll talk about that in the next hour as well. Yeah. I feel like we're just getting going, and that's because we're just getting going.
Right.
So we'll close out. We're not even going to, I'll say class dismissed. You have a 5-minute break between this and a World Awakening, and we're going to pick up where we left off, Jeff, because I think that this is really important for us to process, to work with, in our minds as a collective. Where do we go from here? Because the cyclical nature that is the nature of life, how do we, does the circle expand like the universe? I mean, are we just making the same friggin' mistakes over and over and over again, and we never learn a goddamn thing? I'm sorry. I know this is not a good day to say that word.
I think you're good. You're good.
I think I am. I really do. I just keep on preaching. I can't help it. It's love. Love is the answer to every single question. If you distill any situation down, the solution is love.
Yep.
Any question, any problem, the solution is love.
Yes.
And when we are at each other's throats, when the conflict seems so pervasive that there's no escaping it, there's no way out of it, then we have failed to learn the message. And many, many millions of the people who are now preaching hate toward the others will have their asses in a pew on Sunday morning proclaiming their devotion to a message that they not only ignore, but actively betray. We will continue this conversation on A World Awakening in a few minutes. For right now, Soul School, this part of the class is dismissed. Go get a cup of coffee. We'll see you back here in about 5 minutes. Mwah. Love you.
Good night.